How does a country with golden beaches, billionaires, and world-class cities fall into crisis by 2025?
Shame! 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 Shame!
Housing affordability has sunk to its lowest level in 3 decades.
You are the worst government we've ever seen.
The Australian dream is about people owning houses.
I've never seen a situation in housing like we're seeing today.
Australia's housing crisis will likely get worse before it gets better.
What if the fall wasn't sudden, but years in the making? Australia's story might shock you. Once known as the land of sunshine and opportunity, Australia was the envy of the world. It had a booming economy fueled by natural resources. Cities like Sydney and Melbourne were ranked among the most livable on Earth. Beaches stretched endlessly, crime was low, wages were high, and for years Australia was sold as the ultimate escape, a peaceful, prosperous island continent. Immigrants came in droves, real estate soared. The government boasted about its resilience during the 2008 crash. The lucky country seemed immune to the chaos elsewhere, but while it looked perfect on the outside, something dark was brewing underneath.
Our rent went up yesterday by 35%.
Life in Australia right now is just so much freaking harder than it was even 2-3 years ago.
Look, I can summarise it this way. In this country, 2 people on good jobs can't afford to buy a home.
And those cracks, they were far deeper than anyone realised. It started with fire. The 2019-2020 bushfires scorched millions of acres. Homes, wildlife, and billions in economic value went up in smoke. The country choked under toxic air, but even after the flames died, the damage lingered. Then COVID hit. Lockdowns battered small businesses, tourism flatlined, the economy shrank. And yet the property market kept rising, artificially inflated by low interest rates and foreign speculation.
Fully expect in 2025, if restaurants and cafes want to survive, they're going to have to increase their menu prices.
CommBank is partnering with the University of New South Wales to deliver a tailored cash flow online management course just for small business owners.
I can only afford the cheaper food. It's really bad for my diabetes.
You are stuck on this very, very low payment, which is not keeping up with the cost of living.
1.7% here, a loss of 37 points or so. Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets.
The few days that we have in the market next week will certainly be volatile.
We've just learnt that Australia's GDP increased by 3.4% in the December quarter.
The Australian economy was estimated to have grown by 0.9%, with over half of this from strong domestic demand.
Australia became dangerously dependent on China. Over 1/3 of its exports went to a single buyer. Iron ore, coal, education, tourism, tied to Beijing's decisions.
Well, and finally, the mining industry in Australia is going through a high-tech revolution.
We want to stay at home and age there. We want to support them.
Meanwhile, housing prices spiralled. Renters were squeezed. Young Australians gave up on ever owning a home. Cost of living ballooned, but wages barely moved. Climate events worsened. Floods in Queensland, droughts in Victoria, insurance premiums skyrocketed. Still, leaders called it temporary. They were wrong, but the trigger that finally broke Australia didn't come from fire or COVID or even China. It came from inside.
Just when we thought our relationship with China couldn't get any worse, last week Beijing delivered us another punch.
The Trade Minister this morning announced that China's not returning his calls. That's a serious problem.
Why the status quo is not an option.
What homeless person can afford to pay $1 million for an apartment in Brighton? They can't.
In 2024, everything unravelled. Tensions with China exploded. Sanctions, tariffs, export bans, billions lost overnight. Iron ore prices crashed. Mining towns faced sudden unemployment. Entire regions went silent. The housing bubble burst next. Thousands defaulted. Banks scrambled. Real estate investors were wiped out.
The complete opposite of what the public would expect.
One of the reasons that a property might be vacant is it's slated for redevelopment.
Inflation pressures remain and cost of living pressures are still very real for many Australians.
Once $1 million homes sold at a loss, people walked away from their mortgages. Then came the talent drain.
There are fears Sydney will suffer from a lack of registered nurses because they're unable to afford skyrocketing rents.
Some are sleeping in their cars, others are struggling to support their families.
There's not much stock out there, so I guess that's the hardest part.
We can't balance our economy to survive in these days to buy a house.
Nurses, engineers, tech workers, they left. Canada, Germany, Singapore offered better pay, better stability. Australia's brightest were done waiting. And just as the grid was strained by climate pressure, energy prices surged. Power cuts hit major cities, blackouts in Perth, rolling outages in Sydney. Families used generators to survive summer heat. The government said, "We're adjusting."
Politicians earn a lot of money, so I think it is certainly an issue. It's just one more thing that people who are struggling to get into the housing market are looking at this and going, well...
To have part-time councillors making decisions to turn, say, farmland into a new suburb where you are talking about vast amounts of money, there's clearly a risk that things can go wrong there.
But the country knew this was collapse in slow motion, and it could have ended there. But then, Australia made its biggest mistake yet. Faced with panic, the government panicked harder. They rolled out massive stimulus, without strategy. Billions flooded the system with no accountability. Inflation soared. To cool it, interest rates were hiked aggressively. Too fast, too hard. People with mortgages saw monthly payments double. Middle-class families were crushed. Food prices spiked. Fuel became unaffordable. Supermarkets rationed essentials. Strikes erupted. Teachers walked out, nurses followed, truckers blocked highways. The country ground to a halt. One Melbourne family, 2 incomes, 6-figure salary, couldn't make rent.
It doesn't seem like we're going to be able to own a house until, or if ever, like maybe when we're 40 or 50.
There's a risk of sabotage, and there's also a risk of intellectual property theft. There's that espionage problem as well.
It is very difficult to get by. I'm hoping it'll get better at some point, but I don't know.
They now live in a van parked near a food bank. Their daughter skips school twice a week to save fuel, and they weren't alone. Australia's safety net tore wide open, and the fall was brutal. This wasn't just economic failure, it was psychological. The dream had died, and the world was watching.
Well, Sarah, Australia's debt has seen a bigger increase than any other major economy in the world since 2000.
I think at the moment that certainly is the perception of many young Tasmanians, that they do see home ownership as a pipe dream.
Many clients often express, perhaps, suicidal thoughts or extreme anxiety.
Higher inflation and higher interest rates coming with it means that the pressure is coming on Australians from around the world, but it's felt around the kitchen table.
Australia's fall wasn't quiet. Tourism, once a $60 billion industry, collapsed. International arrivals plummeted. Airlines cut routes. Hotels shuttered. Foreign investors fled. Global corporations pulled out. Tech hubs in Sydney and Brisbane dried up. Startups moved to Southeast Asia. Venture capital vanished. Australia's international image, once clean, green and elite, tanked.
I bear no grudges. I bear no one any malice.
I can assure you that this political drama is over.
Housing booms have given way to housing slumps. Housing investment in many countries will remain depressed for some time to come.
Global rankings for safety, happiness and prosperity slipped. Don't move to Australia trended on social media. Diplomats tried damage control. It didn't work. Australia was no longer a rising star. It was a warning sign.
In China, and now exports of iron ore from Australia and Brazil in particular, which were up about 50% during the month of June versus May, it's really picked up steam and showing some encouraging signs for the freight market overall.
But here's the kicker. This entire collapse. It was avoidable. The mistakes weren't random. Australia never diversified. It stayed addicted to mining exports, even as tech reshaped the world.
The Chinese people are having more and more favourable attitudes towards Australia and equally towards Australian products.
We recognise the complexities in managing this relationship.
While other nations moved toward AI, renewables and infrastructure, Australia stuck with rocks and real estate. Housing reform? Delayed for decades. Foreign ownership loopholes, tax incentives for investors, lack of supply, never fixed. Young Australians were priced out while politicians protected the bubble. Tech innovation, ignored. Green energy, underfunded, infrastructure creaking. The lucky country ran out of luck because no one planned for what came next.
Good morning. Almost 3 million workers will get a pay rise from next month, with the Fair Work Commission handing down its decision on minimum wages.
Could be that the cost of our snitty at $28 is not right at 28. It needs to be 30 or 32.
The industry does need a pay rise. A lot of people don't realise security officers, wherever we are, we're on the ward. That's our base.
But amid the wreckage, something unexpected began to stir.
Looks like every week I come here, it feels like there's more and more people here, which is a bit distressing.
1 million Australians have reached their credit limit and opened a secondary account.
We're dealing with numbers that used to be close to about 10,000 a year, and now we're looking up towards the 13,000s. So there is no slowing down.
It started in small towns. In Western Australia, local councils rejected federal energy plans and built their own solar grids. In Tasmania, Indigenous land stewardship techniques revived farmland and reduced bushfire risk. Tech partners from Japan and the Netherlands offered joint development programs, conditional on reform. That pressure worked. Some legislation finally shifted. Communities came together. Co-ops formed. Local currencies emerged. In some regions, unemployment fell. Food prices stabilised. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't flashy. But it was something.
Chronic, and it's getting worse every day. Australia was just running out of people.
We'll spend an entire shift running around. We won't have a chance to go on a break because there's something that's urgent happening.
A sliver of hope in a collapsed economy. So, is this the start of a comeback? Or just a temporary pause before a deeper fall? Australia's story isn't unique. It's just the first major Western nation to publicly break under modern pressure. Global volatility, resource addiction, policy failure, and climate chaos. Once considered paradise, it's now a case study in how fast things fall apart when leadership delays the hard decisions. And now we ask, what happens when paradise becomes unaffordable? Do you think Australia can bounce back from this? Would you still move there in 2025? Or is the lucky country done for good? Drop your thoughts below.
It's a tax cut, it's not tax reform, which is what we need to address bracket creep, which is what is making a lot of money for the government, but it's really affecting Australian households and it's really affecting young Australians particularly.
Australia's success was always called a miracle. But maybe that was the problem. This wasn't a nation forged by deep reform or visionary strategy. It was built on booming commodity prices, low population density, and decades of good timing.
We have now been in a household recession for 7 quarters.
Global economic uncertainty and higher interest rates is smashing household budgets and slowing our economy.
It was rich in minerals, surrounded by oceans, and politically stable in a chaotic region. That's not a plan. That's a lucky hand. And for a while it worked. But instead of using that luck to build long-term resilience, Australia doubled down on it. The mining booms paid for tax cuts, not transformation. Surpluses were treated as political trophies, not strategic war chests. And now, those same countries are facing similar shocks. But unlike Australia, they might not get the warning shot first, because the collapse didn't start with numbers. It started with belief. The true collapse happened in the minds of ordinary people. When Australians saw billion-dollar corporations get bailed out, but food prices still rising, something broke. When frontline workers were called heroes in 2020 and then laid off in 2024, something snapped. When a generation that was promised home ownership found themselves renting sheds and sleeping in cars, the trust was gone. Faith in the system vanished. And once that happens, no amount of stimulus or slogans can bring it back. It wasn't the Reserve Bank. It wasn't a housing policy. It wasn't even China. It was the loss of belief that this place could work for regular people. And once people stop believing, collapse doesn't need a budget. It becomes a mindset. Suddenly, the future wasn't about career goals. It was about surviving. People hoarded canned food, learned how to filter rainwater, started gardens. Not for fun, for survival. Private security firms saw a 300% surge in demand in major cities. Self-defense classes sold out. Police response times doubled, then tripled. In regional towns, some residents formed watch groups, not for crime, but in case the power failed or the banks went down. The middle class, once the bedrock of Australian life, was now shrinking into survival mode. Australia didn't feel like a G20 country anymore. It felt like something between Venezuela and post-Brexit United Kingdom. Drifting, divided, unstable. And still, the world kept calling it paradise. Google best countries to live in, and Australia still shows up. Tourism ads still show blue water, smiling families, happy kangaroos. But if you ask the people actually living there, many were barely holding it together. There's a dangerous gap between how a country looks from the outside and what's happening on the inside. Australia was a master at selling the postcard. But the real picture? 1 in 5 households skipping meals. Entire suburbs turned into ghost towns as landlords fled the market. Kids dropping out of school to support their families. It wasn't just the economy that collapsed, it was the myth. And that myth had been sold to millions, now watching it unravel. But could it have been different? Yes, it didn't have to be this way. Australia had the tools, the brains, the resources, the warnings. There were moments, real chances, to pivot. In 2016, when housing prices overtook income ratios across all major cities. In 2019, when bushfires made global headlines and sparked climate urgency. In 2020, when COVID showed the fragility of global supply chains. In 2022, when tensions with China became undeniable. Each of those moments could have triggered change, but instead, the response was always the same: delay, deny, deflect, until there were no more delays left. The worst collapses don't happen suddenly. They happen slowly, and then all at once. What happens when the middle class breaks? Australia used to be called the land of the middle class. Not anymore. In 2025, that dream was officially dead. The average Aussie family, drowning in debt, spending over 60% of income just to keep a roof. Parents skipping meals so their kids can eat. Formerly stable careers. Teachers, paramedics, public servants, now on strike or out of work. And this wasn't just about money, it was about identity. The idea that if you work hard, you'll be okay collapsed. Suddenly, working 2 jobs didn't guarantee stability. Saving didn't guarantee a home. Loyalty didn't guarantee security. And in a country that prided itself on fairness, that cut deep. And once the middle breaks, the foundation of society starts to rot. The youth saw it first. Young Australians had already given up on buying homes, but now they were giving up on Australia entirely. Gen Z didn't just leave the job market, they left the country. Thousands applied for relocation visas. Ireland, Canada, Germany, anywhere with better chances. Universities saw plummeting enrolments. Students were no longer chasing degrees, they were chasing survival. Meanwhile, elderly Australians who built lives on the promise of a pension and paid off homes suddenly found their savings worthless. Their adult children moved back in. Their retirement vanished. 3 generations, living under one roof. Not out of love, out of necessity. This wasn't just an economic failure, it was intergenerational trauma unfolding in real time. And the scars won't be visible on graphs or GDP, they'll be passed down for decades. What the world should learn from Australia. This collapse didn't come from war. It wasn't terrorism. It wasn't some massive cyber attack. It came from neglect, arrogance, a failure to evolve. A country that thought it was untouchable didn't future-proof, didn't diversify, didn't listen. And now, other countries are next in line. If your city has rising rent, crumbling infrastructure, dependence on one sector, brain drain, or growing inequality, pay attention. Australia wasn't the exception. It was the preview. And the longer you ignore that lesson, the faster it becomes your reality. But here's the twist. In the ashes, something is growing. Rural cooperatives are stabilising. Indigenous-led sustainability models are gaining traction. Tiny homes, shared solar grids, and water sovereignty programs are being tested. In some places, this collapse created clarity. The question is, will that spread? Or will it be crushed under the weight of the system trying to return to the way things were? Because here's the brutal truth. Australia won't go back to what it was. The only question now is what it becomes. Let's bring it back to you. Could your country be next? Would you live in Australia in 2025? If you were in charge, what would you have done differently? Drop your take below. We read every single comment, and your insight fuels the next video. Australia had it all and still blew it. Now the rest of the world is watching.